Close your eyes now. Let your breath slow down, soft and steady. You are safe here. You are warm, comfortable, and calm. Tonight, we will travel far back in time. We will go to ancient Egypt, the land of the Nile. The river was wide, slow, and green. Palm trees lined its banks. The sun shone bright by day, and the stars stretched endlessly by night. When people think of ancient Egypt, they often imagine pyramids, kings, and temples. But behind the grand stone faces, ordinary people lived. They worked, they sweated, they created, and they endured. Their lives were filled with tasks that seem strange to us today. Some jobs were hard, some were unpleasant, some were even dangerous, and yet each job had a place, a purpose, and a rhythm. This story is about those unusual jobs. We will not hurry. We will take them one by one. You will hear how people worked, what they touched, what they smelled, what they saw. There will be no rush, no noise, just calm, slow words. Words like footsteps in the sand, leading you deeper into rest. So breathe gently, and let us begin with the first strange job, the sandal maker. Section 1. The sandal maker from old leather. Imagine walking barefoot on desert ground. The stones are sharp. The sand is hot. Your feet burn, crack, and bleed. To walk far, you need sandals. In Egypt, sandals were simple. They were flat soles held by straps. They were not fancy, though rich people sometimes had decorated pairs. But most were plain, practical, and quickly worn down. And so there was the sandal maker. He sat in a small shop of mud bricks. The walls were rough, the floor dusty. A small doorway let in light and warm air. Around him lay heaps of leather. Some was fresh, some was old, some was rotting. Animal hides dried in the sun, scraps from other sandals cut and torn. The smell was strong. It was sour and thick, a mix of old skin and hot air. To soften the hides, he soaked them. He used water, sometimes mixed with oils or animal fat. The fat turned rancid in the heat. It gave off a heavy, greasy scent. Flies buzzed in clouds, circling and landing. The sound was steady. Bzz, bzz, bzz. The sandal maker worked with stone tools. He had a knife made from sharpened flint. He scraped, scraped, scraped at the leather. Each scrape sent up dust and tiny flakes. His hands were rough and scarred. His nails were black from the work. His fingers were cracked from the dryness. Still, he kept scraping, cutting, shaping. When the leather was soft enough, he cut soles. He cut straps. He tied them together with plant fibers, twisted into cords. He measured by eye, not by numbers. The sandals were simple but useful. They lasted only weeks before breaking. Straps snapped, soles split. Customers always came back for more. Sometimes the sandal maker patched old sandals. He stitched torn straps, added new layers to thin soles. He worked slowly, carefully, repeating the same motions every day. His life was measured in sandals. Children often helped. They fetched water, carried reeds, or cleaned scraps from the floor. They played with leftover leather pieces, pretending they were toys. But soon, their hands too learned the steady work. The workshop was never silent. Scraping sounds, buzzing flies, children's soft chatter. Outside, the street noises mixed in. donkeys braying, traders calling. Life pressed in from all sides, yet the work stayed the same. For the sandal maker, there was little honor. The job was lowly. No priest blessed his sandals. No king praised his work. But without him, people's feet would bleed on stone roads. Without him, farmers could not walk the fields. Without him, traders could not cross the hot sand. His quiet craft carried Egypt step by step. At night, the smell clung to him. It was in his hair, his clothes, his skin. Even when he lay down to rest, the scent of leather and fat followed him. But he accepted it, for it was his life. So imagine him now, cross-legged, bent over, scraping with slow rhythm. The fire nearby smolders faintly. The flies hum softly in the warm air. You can almost hear the rasp of his blade. You can almost feel the dry heat on your cheeks. The work is endless, steady, and calm. It is strange, unpleasant, yet necessary. And as you picture him, let yourself sink into his rhythm. Scrape, cut, tie. Scrape, cut, tie. Over and over, like breathing. The sandal maker was only one small part of ancient Egypt. But through his hands, the whole land walked. Quietly, invisibly, step by step. Section 2. The Crocodile Keeper at the Temple. Now let us move away from the dusty sandal workshop and step into another world entirely. A place where shadows are cooler, air is damp, and the sounds are deeper and slower. This is not a shop on a noisy street. This is a temple. Its walls are carved with symbols, lines of gods and offerings. Torches burn in sconces, giving off the smell of smoke and resin. Priests walk barefoot across the stone floors, and robes brushing softly. And here, in the dim corners, lives something ancient, heavy, and alive. A crocodile. The Egyptians worshipped the god Sobek, the crocodile god of strength, water, and fertility. In his honor, some temples kept real crocodiles as living symbols. They were not pets. They were not truly tame. They were holy and dangerous at once. But someone had to care for them. That someone was the crocodile keeper. The crocodile keeper's job was strange and frightening. Each day, he walked through the temple halls carrying baskets of food. Fish, ducks, chunks of meat, sometimes bread dipped in honey. The food was placed carefully near the water's edge, where the crocodile lay half hidden, its thick tail curled, its jaws half open. The keeper had to move slowly, never rushing, never making sharp sounds, because the crocodile could snap in an instant. Its teeth were sharp as knives, its eyes yellow and unblinking. The water rippled around it, dark and still, like a mirror waiting to break. The crocodile keeper bent down, placed the food, and stepped back. He waited, hands steady, heart pounding, until the creature moved. A sudden splash, a lunge, jaws closing with a crack that echoed through the hall. The food was gone. The water calmed again. The keeper exhaled, quiet, relieved. But this was only one part of his work. The crocodile needed more than food. Its pool had to be cleaned. Algae scraped from the sides. Water drawn in fresh from the Nile. Weeds and reeds gathered to give it shade. The keeper's hands were always wet, always smelling of river water. His clothes were damp and stained with mud. Sometimes the crocodile grew sick. It would not eat. It lay too still, its body pale with sand. Then the keeper had to treat it, bringing oils, herbs, or offerings. Priests chanted prayers, while the keeper rubbed salves along the creature's scaly back, hoping it would recover. And always, there was danger. One mistake, one wrong movement, and the crocodile could turn. It did not know kindness. It did not know loyalty. It knew only hunger and strength. The keeper bore scars, long marks on his arms, his legs, reminders of close calls. Still, he returned every day. Why? Because this was more than an animal. This was Sobek's symbol, a living god to the people. Farmers prayed to Sobek for fertile fields. Women prayed for healthy children. Soldiers prayed for strength. The crocodile keeper's work gave shape to those prayers. Without him, the holy beast would starve, the symbol would fade, and faith would weaken. The keeper's life was quiet, hidden in shadows. Most never knew his name. He was not a priest in shining linen. He was not a noble or a scribe. He was the man behind the scenes, the one who fed the gods' jaws. At night, when his work was done, he left the temple with his basket empty, his body tired, his skin damp. He walked the narrow streets, hearing laughter and music from houses. Yet he carried with him the weight of his task, the memory of yellow eyes watching him in silence. Sometimes the temple raised more than one crocodile. The keepers worked together, hauling meat, cleaning pools, guiding creatures that slid and splashed through dark waters. The air smelled always of wet stone, fish, and smoke. The sound of splashing water was never far away, and when a crocodile died, it was not thrown aside. It was mummified, wrapped carefully in linen, treated with resins and oils, placed in sacred tombs. The keeper often helped with this, laying strips of cloth, binding the creature like a king. It was a strange honor to bury a god. Imagine, for a moment, the crocodile keeper at work. His bare feet wet on the stones, his hands carrying heavy baskets of fish, his arms scarred but steady. The echo of jaws snapping in the dim hall, the water rippling like dark glass. The temple was never fully silent. The priests chanted softly. The torches hissed as they burned. The river outside flowed with slow power. But within it all, the keeper's rhythm was steady. He moved carefully, breathed carefully, fought carefully. One wrong step could end his life, so his days became a kind of meditation. Every moment filled with care, every action taken with thought. He had no choice but to be calm. The crocodile demanded it. The temple demanded it. And so his heart beat slower, his mind quieter, his steps gentler. In this way, the crocodile keeper survived. He endured the danger. He endured the shadows. He endured the strangeness of his work. He lived between fear and reverence, between danger and holiness. It was a life few could imagine, and fewer still would ever want. Yet for him, it was simply life. Another dawn, another basket of fish, another pair of watching eyes in the water, another day feeding Sobek's living shadow. Section 3. The Tomb Painter and the Dust of Death. In the dry cliffs of the Valley of the Kings, the air was always heavy with silence. The wind hissed across the rocks, carrying fine grains of sand that stung the eyes and clung to the skin. Beneath the cliffs, deep tunnels were carved into the earth, winding chambers where kings would one day sleep for eternity. These chambers were not empty. Their walls waited for color, for stories, for life painted onto stone. And the one who gave them that life was the tomb painter. The tomb painter's job was unlike any other in ancient Egypt. He was not a farmer. His hands were not blistered by plows or sickles. He was not a priest. His voice did not chant prayers at the altar. He was not a soldier. No spear nor shield weighed on his arms. Instead, he carried brushes, pigments, and bowls of ground minerals, and his duty was to paint the very journey of the soul onto the walls of the dead. The painter lived half in this world and half in another. Every stroke of his brush was meant to prepare the pharaoh for life after death. He painted the sun god Ra sailing across the heavens in his golden boat, the goddess Ma'at spreading her wings of truth, and the jackal-headed Anubis guiding the soul into the underworld. But the work was not glamorous. It was long, repetitive, exhausting. The walls were rough at first. Before the painting even began, they had to be smoothed, plastered with a mixture of clay, straw, and gypsum. The painters bent for hours in the dark, pressing the plaster onto stone, waiting for it to dry, smoothing it with flat stones until their arms ached. Dust filled their lungs, plaster caked their skin. By the time they picked up a brush, they were already weary. And then came the drawing, first in red, light sketches that marked the outlines of gods, kings, boats, animals, and hieroglyphs, then in black. The lines were sharpened, corrected, made final. These outlines spread across walls and ceilings, covering entire rooms with scenes that wrapped around like a river of stories. The pigments were their treasures, though they were simple by our eyes today. Blue was made from ground azurite or copper salts, green from malachite, red and yellow from ochre, black from soot, white from chalk or gypsum. The painter crushed them carefully, mixed them with water or egg, stirred them until smooth. The bowls of color were small suns in the dark tomb, glowing against the flickering light of oil lamps. The work took months, sometimes years. Painters crouched on scaffolds, stretching their arms high to reach the ceiling, their backs bent, their hands cramped. The air was thick with smoke from lamps, with dust from plaster, with the earthy smell of pigments. Their clothes clung to their skin, damp with sweat in the suffocating underground. And yet, the painter continued. Stroke by stroke, figure by figure, he filled the walls. Every god carefully shaped, every hieroglyph carefully placed. A single mistake could not be tolerated. These were not mere decorations. They were spells. To paint Ra without his boat, to draw Anubis without his jackal face, to miss a symbol in the Book of the Dead, these errors could doom the king's soul in the afterlife. The responsibility was heavy, almost crushing, and it weighed on the painter's shoulders more than the stone ceiling above him. He worked in silence. The only sounds were the scrape of plaster, the dip of brush in pigment, the soft whisper of strokes across the wall. Sometimes, faintly, the wind outside howled through the cliff tunnels. Sometimes, in the deeper hours, the painter heard only his own breathing and the echo of his heart. But silence did not mean peace. The painter lived with death as his closest companion. He painted coffins. He painted the journeys of souls. He painted rituals that spoke only of endings. Each figure he brushed onto the wall reminded him. One day, he too would lie in darkness, waiting for his own journey across the underworld. The dangers were real, too. The tombs were not safe places. The air grew thin the deeper one went. Smoke from the oil lamps burned the lungs. The plaster dust cut at the throat. Some painters coughed for days, their chests tight, their voices hoarse. Others fell ill and did not return. And still they painted. The June painter was not honored like a noble. His name was rarely written on the walls he painted. His face, his story, his life vanished into silence. The Pharaoh would be remembered forever, painted in gold and glory. But the one who made that glory with his brush remained hidden. The painter's work was eternal, but his own life was small, invisible. And yet, perhaps in the quiet of his work, there was a strange peace. The painter held in his hands the power to shape eternity. His brush gave color to gods, gave wings to souls, gave paths to kings who would live forever. Even as no one remembered his name, his work endured, his colors still glowing thousands of years later, when even empires had crumbled into dust. Imagine him there now, crouched in the lamp-lit dark, a bowl of blue pigment at his side, a fine reed brush in his hand. His arm moves slowly, carefully, steady as his breath. The wall before him blooms with color. A god, a boat, a bird with wings outstretched. The silence deepens, broken only by the soft sigh of his brush. The painter does not look at us. He does not need to. His eyes are fixed on the wall, on the journey unfolding, on the gods he brings into being. His work is endless, his world small, his days long. But in that moment, with each careful stroke, he holds eternity in his hand. Section 4. The Lice Collector of the Palace. In the golden courts of Pharaoh's palace, where polished floors reflected sunlight and the scent of lotus drifted through painted halls, not all work was noble. Beneath the shimmer of jewels and the rustle of silken linen, there were tasks so humble, so strange that few would ever wish them. Among them was the work of the lice collector. The lice collector's duty was as unglamorous as it was necessary. For in ancient Egypt, no matter how rich, no matter how divine a ruler claimed to be, lice did not respect crowns. They crawled through hair, nestled in beards, and hid in the folds of cloth. They bit at skin, they itched, they spread discomfort and disease. And in a land where the pharaoh's body was considered sacred, such pests could not be tolerated. So there were men and women trained to remove them. Imagine the scene: a great hall of painted columns. The pharaoh reclines upon a couch of carved wood, draped in fine linen, gold rings gleaming on his hands. Around him, musicians pluck harps, servants pour wine, fans of ostrich feathers wave in the air. And in the quiet shadow near his throne kneels the lice collector, eyes lowered, hands steady, searching through the king's hair with careful patience. The task required a strange intimacy. Fingers combed slowly through strands of hair, parting them with precision. Nails and small combs caught the crawling pests. Each louse was plucked away and crushed between fingernails, or dropped into bowls of water where it drowned, legs twitching before going still. The work was slow, repetitive, almost endless. Hours could pass in silence, broken only by the faint scratching of nails through hair, the soft snap of lice being destroyed. It was not only the pharaoh who required this service. Nobles, priests, and wealthy households also depended on lice collectors. Wherever there was fine linen, perfume, and close company, there were lice, thriving unseen. The collectors moved quietly from chamber to chamber, from head to head, their fingers always searching, their eyes always sharp. But the palace collectors bore the greatest responsibility. To touch the pharaoh's body was a privilege few were allowed. The pharaoh was not merely a man, he was Horus on earth, the living god. a bridge between people and the divine. To approach him so closely, to touch his hair, to comb through his scalp, was both an honor and a danger. One mistake, a scratch too deep, a sign of negligence, a word spoken at the wrong moment, could mean punishment. The collectors worked in silence. They did not speak unless spoken to. Their breath was soft, their hands steady, their movements precise. They lived in the background of the palace, almost invisible. Their presence acknowledged only when needed, and yet their work shaped appearances. For Egyptians cared deeply about cleanliness. They shaved their heads, wore wigs, oiled their skin, bathed daily in the Nile's water mixed with natron salts. Lice threatened that sense of purity. They clung stubbornly even to the cleanest heads, weaving through wigs, hiding in woven cloth. To maintain the illusion of perfection, the lice collectors labored endlessly, ensuring that kings and nobles appeared untouched by such indignities. The tools of their trade were simple but constant companions. Small combs carved from wood or ivory, their teeth fine and close, designed to catch the tiny insects. Bowls of water for drowning them. Fingernails sharpened carefully, used to crush pests swiftly and without fuss. Sometimes oils were rubbed into the hair, making it slick, suffocating the lice before they were pulled free. The collectors carried these tools quietly, as a scribe carried his reed pens, as a soldier carried his spear. The work was monotonous, hour after hour, day after day, the same motions repeated, parting hair, searching, plucking, crushing. The collectors' eyes grew weary, their backs stiff, their fingers sore, and yet they continued, for the palace demanded it, for the pharaoh demanded it, for life in Egypt demanded it. But there was more than monotony. There was also danger. Lice spread sickness. The collectors were always at risk of infection. Their fingers nicked, their skin irritated, their own hair never safe. They lived close to disease, always exposed, always vulnerable. Few envied their work, though many depended upon it. And still, within the strange intimacy of their labor, there was a quiet power. The lice collector was one of the few who touched the pharaoh's head, one of the few who bent close enough to hear his breath, to see the lines on his face, to smell the oils on his skin. They saw him not as a distant god, but as a man, one with hair, with sweat, with pests. For a moment, the divine was stripped away, and what remained was fragile, human. The collector, of course, could never speak of this. His lips were sealed, his eyes downcast. He was a shadow in the palace, his thoughts hidden, his presence fleeting. And yet perhaps, in the deep silence of the halls, when the work was done and the bowl of drowned lice was emptied, he carried within him a secret truth, that even gods could itch. Imagine him now, kneeling on cool stone, his hands steady, his gaze focused. Before him, the pharaoh's head gleams with perfumed oil, strands of black hair glistening under the flicker of torchlight. The collector parts the hair with slow care, searching, always searching. His fingers move like whispers, delicate, precise. A louse is found, plucked, destroyed. Another and another. The hall is quiet, the musicians gone, the night deep. Only the soft sound of his work remains, steady and unending. This was his world, not battles, not rituals, not power, but the endless search through hair for pests too small for glory. A strange world, a humble world, yet one that kept the illusion of perfection alive in the heart of Egypt. And so the lice collector labored, unseen yet necessary, close to kings yet far from tower, his hands forever moving, his work forever forgotten. Section 5. The Sandal Maker for the Dead. When we think of sandals, we imagine something simple, something ordinary, a piece of leather tied with straps to shield the feet from hot stones, rough sand, or cold earth. In ancient Egypt, however, sandals were more than practical. They were symbols of purity, of order, of civilization itself. To walk barefoot upon the dust of the world was seen as unrefined, but to wear sandals was to walk with dignity, protected from chaos. And for this reason, sandals did not belong only to the living. They were given to the dead as well. The task of making sandals for the deceased was a peculiar one, and it fell to craftsmen who labored not in bustling markets or sunlit courtyards, but often in quiet workshops tied to the necropolis, where the silence of death pressed in on all sides. These were men who shaped leather not for walking feet, but for feet that would never move again. They stitched sandals not for journeys on earth, but for the long passage into eternity. The sandals themselves were crafted with great care. Fine leather, softened with oils, cut and shaped into soles. Straps stitched neatly, sometimes dyed with rich colors, sometimes left plain. The work required patience, precision, and devotion, for though the dead would never truly wear them, sandals were believed to hold power in the afterlife. Without them, a soul might be forced to walk barefoot through rough, burning sands in the underworld. Their journey slowed, their dignity diminished. To die without sandals was to risk discomfort in eternity. And so, families paid sandal makers to prepare pairs for their loved ones. Some were simple, for common folk, a gesture of respect and tradition. Others were extravagant, crafted from papyrus fiber, or decorated with beads, or even gilded. Their beauty meant to please the gods and show the wealth of the departed. A noble might be buried with several pairs, laid neatly by his feet, as though packing luggage for a long journey. The sandal maker's work, however, was not without strangeness. Unlike ordinary shoemakers, who measured the living, fitting soles to walking feet, these craftsmen often worked from memory, or from the body of the deceased, lying in the workshop before them. Imagine the stillness of such a scene. A body wrapped loosely in linen, its face pale, its limbs stiff. Beside it, the sandal maker bends low, measuring cold feet with strips of reed, cutting leather to size, whispering prayers under his breath. There is no chatter, no laughter, only the soft scrape of knife against hide, the faint hum of flies, the sound of leather being pulled tight and stitched. The job carried a heavy weight of ritual. Sandals were not merely objects, but offerings, gifts placed into tombs with intention and hope. The maker had to craft them with care, for careless work risked angering the family, or worse, displeasing the gods. A loose stitch, a weak strap, could be seen as disrespectful. A sandal too small could doom the dead to stumble. And though mistakes might go unnoticed by living eyes, the fear remained. What if the gods themselves judged the quality of the work? In this way, sandal makers for the dead lived in a world balanced between craft and faith. Their hands were skilled, but their hearts carried reverence, for each piece of leather, shaped and sewn, was not only an object, but a bridge between worlds. It was not always a clean job. Leather was cut from the hides of animals, tanned and prepared with strong-smelling substances. The workshop smelled of fat, oil, and dye, the air heavy with the scent of work. And when tied to the necropolis, the air also carried the odor of death, faint, lingering, impossible to escape. Some sandal makers worked so close to embalmers that the smell of resin, of natron salts, of drying flesh became part of their daily lives. Their hands touched life and death in equal measure, shaping sandals by lamplight while mummies were wrapped nearby. The monotony of the work was broken only by the stories whispered among craftsmen. They spoke of spirits returning to inspect their burial goods, of sandals that had gone missing only to reappear days later, of ghosts who complained of tight straps in dreams. Whether truth or superstition, such tales were taken seriously, for in Egypt, the barrier between life and death was thin, and objects meant for the afterlife carried power. Yet, despite the strangeness of their role, sandal makers were respected. They were artisans tied to sacred rites, their work buried in tombs beside treasures of gold, alabaster jars, painted masks. Their sandals, though humble in appearance, traveled farther than any man could dream, into the halls of Osiris, across the fiery deserts of the underworld, into the eternal fields of reeds where the dead walked forever. Imagine, if you will, one such craftsman, seated cross-legged on the floor of his dim workshop. Before him lies a strip of leather, smooth and shining with oil. He cuts slowly, his knife steady, his breath calm. To his side rests a pair of sandals already finished, their soles sturdy, their straps neat. Behind him, shadows flicker across the wall, cast by the flame of a single oil lamp. In the silence, he works, stitch by stitch, sole by sole, knowing that when his task is done, these sandals will walk not across desert sands, but into eternity. Perhaps he wonders as he works whether his own feet will one day wear such sandals, whether another craftsman will measure his still form, cutting leather with the same care, stitching straps with the same patience. Whether his sandals will be simple or fine or lost in the sands of time. These thoughts are not spoken, but they linger in the quiet air, unanswerable yet ever present. For in Egypt, sandals were never just sandals. They were symbols of purity, of preparation, of dignity in life and in death. And the men who made them for the departed held a role at once strange and sacred, creating not shoes, but silent companions for a soul's eternal journey. Section 6. The Keeper of Sacred Animals. Among the many strange and delicate roles in ancient Egypt, few were as curious as the job of keeping sacred animals. To the Egyptians, animals were not simply beasts that walked the earth. They were symbols, embodiments of gods, messengers between the divine and mortal worlds. A cat could reflect the presence of Bastet, the goddess of home and protection. A bull might be seen as a vessel of Apis, tied to fertility and strength. Even small creatures, ibis birds, crocodiles, scarab beetles, carried deep meaning. Caring for these creatures was not a simple duty, it was a holy responsibility. The keepers of these animals lived in a world balanced between the natural and the divine. They fed, washed, and housed creatures thought to be more than flesh. The sacred bull of Apis, for example, lived in great comfort. He was chosen for his unique markings, kept in a temple stable, fed the best food, and treated almost like royalty. The keeper's job was to ensure that this bull was healthy, clean, and content, for every gesture mattered. To neglect him was to risk angering not only the priests, but also the gods themselves. Other animals required different forms of care. Cats, beloved across the land, often roamed freely around temples dedicated to Bastet. Keepers ensured they had food, bedding, and safe spaces to wander. Sometimes they were adorned with jewelry, tiny golden earrings or collars, a symbol of the divine spark within them. Ibis birds, sacred to Thoth, were bred and raised near temple grounds. Their long beaks dipped into shallow waters as they fed on fish and insects, while keepers tended to their needs quietly and carefully. Crocodiles, sacred to Sobek, were kept in pools where they were fed meat offerings. Imagine the stillness of such a scene. A keeper standing by a pool, tossing cuts of flesh into the water, watching the slow, deliberate movement of a reptile whose body shimmered in the sunlight. It was not always a clean or simple job. Feeding a crocodile carried risks. Handling large animals demanded patience and care, and yet the keepers moved calmly, with quiet respect. Their work was not rushed, not harsh, but deliberate and careful, for every action was tied to ritual. To wash a cat, to comb its fur, to offer food to an ibis was an act of devotion. These animals were more than pets. They were vessels of divinity. In time, some sacred animals died, and this brought yet another task for the keepers. They were often involved in preparing the bodies for mummification. A cat might be carefully wrapped in linen, its small body transformed into a sacred bundle. An ibis, preserved with care, would be placed into a jar-shaped coffin. A crocodile, embalmed and bound, could be laid within a special tomb. These animal mummies were then offered in rituals, buried in sacred places, or kept in temples. The keeper, who once fed and cared for the living creature, now watched as it was prepared for eternity. The emotional weight of this task cannot be overlooked. For months or years, a keeper might care for one animal, watching it eat, grow, and live its days. And then, at the end, he had to hand it over to the embalmers, knowing it would never open its eyes again. Yet, there was comfort, too, for the Egyptians believed that death was not an end, but a passage. Just as humans journeyed into the afterlife, so too did animals. And the care shown in life was continued in death, ensuring that the divine spark carried on. The keeper's daily life was filled with rhythm and routine. At dawn, he might wake to the soft sound of animals stirring, the quiet mew of cats, the low sound of a bull shifting in its stable, the rustle of birds in shallow pools. He would carry food, clean enclosures, offer water. Each action was small, but each carried meaning. Even sweeping the floor of a temple stable was an act of purification, of respect for the presence of the divine. The smells were distinct, the earthy scent of animals, mixed with hay, with water, with incense that drifted from temple altars. The sounds, too, painted a strange symphony, the flap of wings, the low rumble of a bull, the soft ripple of water as crocodiles slipped beneath the surface. To live among sacred animals was to live in a space where nature and worship blended, where every sense reminded the keeper of his unusual place in the world. It was not a glamorous role, though it carried honor. The keepers were often unseen, their work hidden behind temple walls. Visitors to temples saw the animals in ritual, polished and displayed, but they did not see the quiet man who cleaned, who fed, who soothed. Yet without him, the rituals could not continue. Without his steady hands, the sacred creatures could not thrive. His role was strange, often tiring, occasionally dangerous, but it was also essential. Imagine, for a moment, such a keeper. He kneels beside a shallow pool, offering food to ibis birds. The water ripples gently as the birds dip their long beaks, their feathers catching the golden light of the morning sun. Behind him, a cat curls on a warm stone, purring softly. From the stable nearby comes the sound of a bull, shifting slowly as it chews. And overhead, the temple walls rise high, painted with symbols of gods who watch in silence. In this moment, the keeper does not rush. He does not worry about wealth, about war, about the affairs of kings. His world is smaller, simpler, but filled with meaning. His task is to care, to ensure that the creatures of the gods are content, healthy, and honored. And in this calm rhythm, he finds his own place in the grand order of things. To us, today, the job might seem strange: to feed crocodiles, to comb the fur of sacred cats, to clean the stable of a bull worshipped as a god. These are duties far from ordinary life. Yet in the slow, patient rhythm of his work, the keeper of sacred animals held a place that was at once humble and divine. Section 7. A reed cutter of the Nile. Among the strangest and most back-breaking jobs in ancient Egypt was that of the reed cutter. At first glance, cutting reeds may not seem unusual, but in the world of the Nile, this task was not only difficult, it was absolutely essential. Without reeds, life in Egypt would have been incomplete. Papyrus reeds provided writing material for scribes, boats for fishermen, mats for sleeping, baskets for carrying goods, sandals for walking, and even rope to bind the world together. To harvest reeds was to supply the bones of Egyptian daily life. Yet the work itself was a slow, grueling ritual of sweat, water, and patience. Imagine the reed cutter rising before dawn. The air is still cool, but he knows the heat will grow unbearable by midday. He walks toward the marshes, where tall stalks of papyrus and other reeds grow thick, their green blades shimmering in the morning light. Around him, the Nile hums with life. Frogs croak, birds call, insects buzz, and the distant splash of fish echoes across the water. This is his workshop, not of stone or wood, but of plants that rise as tall as a man and sway gently in the wind. The work begins with tools that are simple but sharp, often a curved blade, small and easy to maneuver among the dense stalks. The reed cutter wades into shallow water, his feet sinking into the mud, his legs brushing against hidden things below the surface. Small fish dart away, but there are other dangers too. Snakes slither unseen, and the ever-present possibility of crocodiles lurks in the deeper pools. The cutter cannot let fear distract him. He bends, slices, gathers, again and again, until his arms ache and his back stiffens. Each stalk must be cut cleanly at the base and gathered into bundles. Too much haste could damage the fibers, making them useless. Too little care could mean the bundles are uneven, difficult to carry. He ties them with strips of reed, forming heavy sheaves that he hoists onto his shoulders. The weight drags at his body, water drips from the bundles, and the sun climbs higher in the sky. Sweat mixes with river spray, and his skin burns beneath the relentless light. This was not a job of elegance. It was messy, dirty, and often exhausting. And yet, without the reed cutter's labor, Egypt would have lost its most versatile material, papyrus in particular. Was more valuable than gold to scribes and officials. From the reeds he cut, scribes would strip away the outer layers, slice the inner fibers into thin strips, soak them, and press them into sheets. These sheets became scrolls, carrying words that shaped laws, recorded prayers, and told stories of kings. Each scroll, filled with knowledge, began with the rough, muddy work of a man knee-deep in marsh water, cutting reeds by hand. Beyond writing, reeds became boats. Narrow skiffs made of bundled papyrus that fishermen and hunters used to glide silently across the water. Imagine the reed cutter watching as others took his harvest, shaping it into vessels that skimmed the Nile, arrows resting ready for the hunt. The same reeds could be woven into mats laid on the floors of homes, into baskets carried to markets, into sandals worn by both farmers and nobles. His work reached every corner of society, though his name was rarely remembered. It was also a job bound by rhythm. The Nile rose and fell with the seasons, and so too did the reed cutter's labor. After the floods, the marshes thickened with fresh growth, and harvests were plentiful. During drier months, the reeds grew sparse, and the work became harder. The cutter learned to read the river as much as the stalks. When the water was safe, when the plants were ready, when the marsh was too dangerous, danger was always present. Standing in waist-high water, with a blade in hand, his skin exposed, he was vulnerable to insects carrying disease, to sharp reeds that cut the flesh, to hidden creatures beneath the surface. And yet, the work continued because it had to. His survival depended on it. But so too did the survival of others. Scribes who needed papyrus, fishermen who needed boats, families who needed mats and baskets. It is strange to think of how much rested on his shoulders. A king might issue decrees on scrolls of papyrus, unaware of the man who had bent in the mud to cut the raw material. Priests might chant hymns written on reed paper, never seeing the one who had sweated in the marsh to make it possible. The reed cutter was invisible in society's grand ceremonies, yet his work was present everywhere. At the end of the day, his body ached. He might sit on the riverbank, watching the sky turn gold and red as the sun set behind the horizon. His bundles lay ready, tied and stacked, waiting to be carried away. For a moment, there was quiet. Only the rustle of reeds in the breeze, the slow ripple of water, and the distant call of birds settling for the night. In this stillness, he might feel the weight of his work, not just on his shoulders, but on the entire land of Egypt. To us, the role may seem dull or even unpleasant, but for the reed cutter, it was life. It was survival, rhythm, and duty. Without him, the voice of Egypt, its scrolls, its records, its prayers, might never have been written. Without him, boats might not have glided across the Nile. Baskets might not have carried grain. Sandals might not have protected feet. In his quiet, often unseen way, the reed cutter bound the society together, strand by strand, stalk by stalk. And though history does not name him, his work lingers in every ancient scroll that survives today, every artifact woven from reeds. Every image carved into tomb walls, showing papyrus boats drifting through the marshes. In his sweat and labor, the very breath of Egypt was shaped. Section 8. The Professional Mourner. In ancient Egypt, death was not quiet. It was marked with rituals, long processions, and cries that filled the air. And among these rituals was the presence of a strange profession, the professional mourner. These were people, often women, who were paid to cry, wail, and display sorrow at funerals. Their job was not to hide grief, but to make it louder, stronger, and more visible to all who passed by. It may seem odd to us now, but in Egypt, their role was vital. Imagine the start of a funeral procession. The body of the deceased is prepared, wrapped in linen, placed in a coffin, ready to be carried through the streets toward its final resting place. Behind it, family members walk, some truly in grief, others showing dignity in silence. And then, among them, are the professional mourners. Their task is to transform quiet sadness into public performance, to shout, to cry, to tear at their hair, to scratch their faces so that blood mixes with tears. Their voices rise above the crowd, high and sharp, echoing like birds calling across the desert. Why was this done? For the Egyptians, mourning was not just personal, it was cosmic. The death of one person reflected the great cycles of life and the afterlife. To wail was to honor that passage, to call the gods to listen, to ensure that the soul of the dead would be noticed and remembered. A silent funeral might seem dishonorable, as though the deceased was not important enough to stir grief. But loud mourning showed the opposite, that the dead mattered, that their life left an echo. The mourners themselves lived a life shaped by ritual. They were often trained in the roles of specific goddesses, most famously Isis and Nephthys, who mourned the death of Osiris. At funerals, mourners might even act out this divine lamentation, taking on the posture and cries of the goddesses. To embody such grief was seen as sacred, but it was also exhausting. Imagine the strain on their voices, the swelling in their throats, the weariness in their bodies after hours of crying under the hot Egyptian sun. They had to be convincing. Their cries could not sound hollow or false. The louder and more dramatic their performance, the more honor was given to the dead. They beat their chests, they tore their garments, they threw dust into their hair. Their bodies became tools of grief, their voices instruments of sorrow. Yet once the funeral ended, they would return home quietly, wash the dust from their skin, and prepare themselves to repeat the same act for another family, another soul, another procession. It was not an easy job. The constant strain could leave them hoarse, their skin scratched and scarred from their own nails. Some may have carried the emotional weight of the role, living every day surrounded by reminders of death. Others may have learned to separate themselves, to see it only as work, a performance for survival. They were, in a sense, both actors and laborers, playing grief like a role upon the stage of the streets. And yet, their presence gave comfort. For the families, it showed that their loved one was worthy of attention. For the community, it reminded them of the cycle of life, of the journey to the afterlife, of the gods who watched over the dead. The wailing rose like a chorus, carrying sorrow to the heavens, weaving sound into ritual. Without the mourners, a funeral would feel empty, silent, unfinished. The mourners became part of a larger pattern of Egyptian life, a society where even grief was organized, ritualized, made into something sacred. Their role bridged the gap between the living and the divine. Their cries echoed the myth of Isis and Nephthys, making every funeral not just about one person, but about the eternal story of death and rebirth. At the end of the day, when their work was done, they may have walked home through quiet streets. Perhaps children stared at them, whispering about their strange cries. Perhaps neighbors looked with respect, or perhaps with discomfort, for to see them was to remember death. But still, they carried on, for the work was necessary, and Egypt itself relied on ritual for balance. It is easy to imagine the sound if you close your eyes. A long, rising cry, drawn from the chest, echoing across mud brick houses, mixing with the beating of drums and the rhythm of footsteps in the funeral march. The voices overlap, one mourner calling out, another answering, until the air is thick with sorrow. The desert sun shines down, the Nile flows nearby, and through it all, the mourners' voices do not stop. Their profession may seem strange to us, but in ancient Egypt, they carried the grief of others, giving shape and sound to what many could not express. They were the voice of sorrow itself, and though their names are lost, their role endures in tomb paintings and texts, where women with raised arms and tear-streaked faces are shown beside the dead, eternal mourners for an eternal land. Section 9. The Lice Picker. In the world of ancient Egypt, hygiene was as much a matter of ritual as it was of comfort. People washed often, shaved heads, and applied oils to their skin. Yet, even with these practices, lice were a constant companion. They were tiny, persistent, and often impossible to fully eradicate. And so, a strange profession emerged, the lice picker. These individuals, often women, were paid to comb through the hair of others, to remove these tiny invaders, and to ensure that the wearer remained both clean and presentable. The job required patience, skill, and a gentle touch. Lice are small, fast, and easy to miss. The picker's fingers became trained instruments, moving slowly through thick hair, separating strands, checking the scalp, and collecting each tiny insect. Sometimes special combs were used, made of wood, bone, or fine metal teeth, designed to snare even the smallest louse. To the untrained eye, it may have seemed tedious, even unpleasant. But for the Egyptians, this work was practical, necessary, and even respected. Imagine a household where a lice picker arrives early in the morning. The sun has barely risen over the Nile, and the air is still cool and damp. Children sit on woven mats, adults on low benches, as the picker kneels and begins her work. She moves with care, brushing through braids and curls, lifting and examining each section. Every movement is slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic. The sound is quiet, soft brushing, occasional murmured instructions, and the gentle swish of hands moving through hair. It was not only about removing lice. The picker also removed nits, tiny eggs that clung stubbornly to the scalp. These had to be scraped gently, sometimes soaked in oils or perfumes to make the hair more manageable. Oils themselves had multiple purposes. They nourished the hair, reduced irritation, and sometimes carried subtle scents, making the work more pleasant for both the picker and the client. The combination of touch, scent, and careful attention made the job almost meditative. The work could be physically demanding. Long hours were spent kneeling or bending, fingers constantly moving, eyes straining to spot each small creature. And yet, there was a rhythm to it, a flow that became almost soothing. The repetitive motion of combing, the steady focus on the task, the tiny victories of removing each louse, all contributed to a quiet sense of purpose. Some pickers specialized in specific households or even for temples. Priests and priestesses required cleanliness not only for comfort, but for ritual purity. A single stray louse on the head of a temple official could be seen as a distraction from sacred duties. In these spaces, the work of a lice picker was elevated. They became part of a chain that kept both humans and sacred spaces pure, contributing invisibly but essentially to the life of the community. The social aspect of the work was interesting as well. Lice pickers often worked in silence, but sometimes they shared quiet conversation. Stories were told, advice exchanged, and small gifts offered for good service. The job required trust, for a stranger working so close to the body and hair had to be gentle, careful, and respectful. Families relied on their skill, and repeat visits were common. Some pickers became known for their speed and thoroughness, gaining reputation as experts in their craft. Despite its strangeness to us today, the role carried dignity. Lice were not seen merely as pests. They were reminders of the need for care and attention. In a society that valued order, ritual, and cleanliness, the act of removing lice was meaningful. The picker ensured comfort, hygiene, and readiness for daily life or ceremonial events. Their work, though often invisible, allowed others to present themselves with confidence, free from itching and embarrassment. At the end of the day, the picker might sit by the river, drying hands and hair in the warm sun, watching reeds sway gently in the breeze. The scent of oils lingered, mixed with the earthy smell of mud bricks and the soft fragrance of baked bread from nearby homes. The Nile flowed quietly, reflecting the colors of the sky, while children played at the water's edge. In these moments, the picker could rest, knowing that her work, repetitive, patient, and precise, had made life smoother for countless people. The job also offered a quiet connection to the cycles of life. Children grew under her care. Adults maintained their health and appearance, and even the elderly could find relief in her work. Each louse removed was a small act of service. Each braid freed of pests a moment of calm. The picker worked not for glory, but for the subtle satisfaction of making daily life better, easier, and more comfortable. To us today, it may seem strange or unpleasant to spend hours plucking tiny insects from hair. Yet in ancient Egypt, it was a respected and vital role. The patience, focus, and care required elevated it beyond mere labor into a quiet art. And although the names of these pickers are lost to time, their contribution to everyday life endures in the comfort and cleanliness of those they served. So, imagine a warm, sunlit room, the soft swish of hair being combed, the gentle scent of oils, the rhythmic movement of hands through strands. Outside, the Nile flows lazily, reeds rustle in the breeze, and life continues calmly around the household. Within that quiet scene, the lice picker moves with steady purpose, a subtle guardian of health and dignity, shaping the day with patience and care. Section 10. The Tomb Painter. In ancient Egypt, the afterlife was a journey that required preparation, care, and beauty. Tombs were not empty chambers, but carefully decorated spaces meant to guide the deceased into the next world. And for this, the work of the tomb painter was essential. These artists spent their days in silence, often crouched over walls, applying color to scenes that would last for centuries. Their job was both artistic and sacred, a quiet bridge between the living and the eternal. The tomb painter worked with brushes made of reeds or fine fibers. Pigments came from minerals, ground carefully into powders, and mixed with water or gum to create long-lasting paint. Red ochre, yellow ochre, lapis lazuli, malachite. Each color had a purpose and meaning. The painter knew which shades represented life, death, fertility, or protection. Every stroke was deliberate, every line guided by tradition, every image an act of devotion. Imagine the painter kneeling on the cool stone floor of a tomb. The air smells faintly of stone dust and pigment, mingled with beeswax or oils used in other preparations. Sunlight streams dimly through the entrance, falling on unfinished walls where sketches have been drawn lightly in charcoal or red paint. Slowly, steadily, the painter begins to bring figures to life. Gods and goddesses, offerings, birds, and animals emerge on the walls. Each detail considered, each symbol meaningful. It was meticulous work. Mistakes could not easily be corrected, and every line had to honor the religious traditions passed down over generations. The painter often worked alongside scribes, masons, and other artisans, that his focus remained inward, on the wall before him, on the story he was helping to tell. The scenes he painted were not only for the deceased, but also for the gods who watched over the tomb. Each figure, each hieroglyph, carried significance. Hours passed in quiet concentration. The painter might rise occasionally to stretch, to mix new pigments, or to study a reference scroll. His hands were stained with colors, his eyes focused, his mind calm. Outside, the sounds of the Nile, distant chatter from nearby villages, or the soft call of birds provided a gentle background. But inside the tomb, only the quiet rhythm of brush on stone existed. The work was physically demanding. Painters crouched or knelt for long periods, sometimes climbing scaffolds to reach higher walls or ceilings. Yet the effort was matched by a sense of purpose. Each painted scene could accompany the deceased for eternity. The images were believed to assist in the afterlife, ensuring protection, sustenance, and guidance. The painter's touch was subtle, but its effect could last thousands of years, a silent contribution to both art and spirituality. Color played a symbolic role as much as an aesthetic one. Blue represented the Nile and life-giving waters. Green symbolized fertility and rebirth. Gold signified divine light. The painter mixed and layered these colors carefully, blending shades to create depth and harmony. Patterns were repeated, shapes mirrored, and figures arranged with precision. Everything had a meaning, a reason, a quiet beauty that balanced the practical and the spiritual. The tomb painter's life was often solitary, yet connected. He communicated through images, shared knowledge with apprentices, and participated in rituals associated with a tomb. He witnessed rituals of dedication, the placement of offerings, and the quiet reverence of those preparing a soul for its journey. In many ways, his work was invisible to daily life, but essential to the eternal order. The painter also faced challenges beyond the technical. Stone walls could be uneven, pigments might fade too quickly, or scaffolds could shake under his weight. He learned to adapt, to steady his hand, to anticipate how the paint would dry, and how colors would change with time. His skill lay not only in artistry, but in patience, observation, and a deep understanding of materials and meaning. At the end of a day, the painter might step back and observe the work. Figures of gods, servants, offerings, and sacred animals glimmered in the soft light. Every detail told a story, every scene connected to life, death, and the hope of eternity. Outside, the Nile flowed calmly, the wind stirred the palm fronds, and the world continued, unaware of the quiet devotion inside the tomb. The tomb painter's legacy was subtle but enduring. He was not the king, nor the priest, nor the scribe whose words guided law or ritual. Yet through his hands, ancient Egypt spoke across millennia. Every wall, every figure, every hue carried his careful touch. He worked slowly, methodically, in a quiet world of pigment and stone, shaping a vision of life beyond life. Imagine sitting beside such a painter, watching him mix colors, seeing the faint outline of an ibis take shape, a goddess slowly emerge, the Nile depicted in gentle blues. The world feels calm, sacred, and timeless, and in that stillness, the tomb painter's work continues to speak, centuries later, whispering of care, devotion, and the delicate art of bridging worlds. Section 11. The perfume mixu. In ancient Egypt, fragrance was more than a luxury. It was a symbol of purity, devotion, and status. Temples, tombs, and even daily life were infused with scents carefully prepared by skilled artisans known as perfume mixers. Their job was precise, delicate, and quietly essential. Without them, rituals would lose their aroma, offerings would feel incomplete, and the subtle elegance of daily life would fade. The perfume mixer began each day surrounded by jars, pots, and small containers of raw ingredients. These included flowers such as lotus, jasmine, and rose, resins like frankincense and myrrh, oils extracted from seeds and nuts, and even rarer materials like ambergris or cinnamon. Each ingredient had its place, its purpose, and its symbolic meaning. The mixer combined them thoughtfully, measuring and blending with patience, creating scents that were both pleasing and sacred. Imagine the mixer in a quiet workshop, light filtering through narrow windows. The air is heavy with aromas, a mixture of sweet, earthy, and resinous scents. Each movement is slow and deliberate. She lifts a tiny spoon of powdered resin, adds a few drops of oil, and stirs with a wooden spatula. Sometimes heat is applied gently to release the fragrance. Sometimes the mixture is left to settle for hours or even days. The process is meditative, a dance of patience and sensory focus. Perfume in Egypt was not only for pleasure. It played a critical role in religion and ritual. Priests anointed statues of gods, pharaohs wore scented oils, and the deceased were perfumed before burial to honor their journey to the afterlife. Each scent carried meaning. Frankincense represented the divine, myrrh invoked protection, floral oils symbolized beauty and vitality. The perfume mixer had to understand not only how to combine ingredients, but also when and how each mixture would be used. The work demanded a keen sense of smell. The mixer learned to distinguish subtle differences in aroma, to know when an oil was too strong or too weak, when a resin needed more blending, and when a mixture reached perfection. Even the smallest imbalance could ruin a batch. To the untrained nose, the differences might seem slight, but for the mixer, they were the difference between a sacred offering and a wasted preparation. The mixer's hands were always engaged. She ground powders, poured oils, and stirred mixtures with care. Tiny splashes of resin could stick to skin, and the rich oils left hands fragrant long after the work ended. Every motion was rhythmic, almost hypnotic. A swirl here, a lift there, a careful sniff to assess progress. It was laborious, precise, and quietly artistic. Sometimes the perfume mixer worked alone, in meditative silence. Other times, she collaborated with priests, royalty, or artisans preparing tunes. The fragrances she created were applied to statues, used in ceremonial fires, rubbed on linens, or offered in jars beside the deceased. Her work extended far beyond her workshop, touching temples, palaces, and homes across the land. The job could be tiring. Some ingredients were sticky, others sharp or pungent. Hours of bending over work tables, inhaling strong resins, could strain the senses. Yet the mixer endured, focused on the rhythm of the work, the transformation of raw substances into fragrant oils that carried meaning and beauty. In this, her labor was both practical and spiritual, bridging the human and divine with scent. Each finished perfume was a story. A floral blend might evoke the blossoming of the Nile floodplain. A resinous mixture could remind the faithful of sacred mountains. A sweet-smelling oil could symbolize youth, health, or renewal. In these tiny jars, history and culture were preserved, waiting for the hands of kings, priests, or mourners to release them into the air. Perfume mixers were rarely celebrated. Their names are mostly lost to time, but their work lingers in tombs and temples, in hieroglyphs and depictions of offerings, and in the air of history itself. They shaped experience, perception, and ritual with subtle care, creating a world where fragrance guided, comforted, and marked the sacred. Imagine sitting quietly in the mixer's workshop. The room is calm, sunlight warm on stone floors. You see oils glimmer in tiny jars, powders shifting under gentle hands, and the faint smoke of incense rising slowly. The scent is soft, layered, and calming. Each breath connects you to the care, patience, and devotion of the ancient artisan, whose quiet labor continues to touch the world centuries later. The perfume mixer reminds us that even the smallest, most delicate work can shape culture and ritual. Through patience, skill, and understanding, she transformed raw substances into something sacred. And in the quiet repetition of her day, grinding, mixing, stirring, smelling, she became a guardian of scent, a silent contributor to beauty, ritual, and memory. Even today, we can imagine the gentle touch, the fragrant air, the slow rhythm of hands and tools, and the serene focus of someone devoted entirely to creating something both practical and divine. The perfume mixer of ancient Egypt was more than a worker. She was an alchemist of scent, a preserver of tradition, and a quiet artist whose labor shaped life, ritual, and the experience of generations. Section 12. The Embalmer's Assistant. In ancient Egypt, preparing a body for the afterlife was one of the most sacred tasks imaginable. The process of mummification required precision, care, and devotion. And though the high priests and embalmers often received recognition, their assistants carried much of the detailed, delicate work. These individuals, the embalmer's assistants, moved quietly and patiently, handling bodies with care, applying oils, removing organs, and ensuring that every step adhered to tradition. Their role was essential, yet it demanded both resilience and calm attention. Imagine the assistant stepping into a dimly lit chamber. The walls are cool stone, faintly scented with oils and incense. Linen cloths are neatly stacked. Jars and natron, the mineral used for drying, line shelves, and the air carries a mixture of herbs and embalming fluids. Each tool, each substance, has a specific purpose. The assistant begins by observing, learning, and following precise instructions. Nothing is rushed. Every motion is slow, deliberate, and careful. The first step often involves cleansing the body. Oils and perfumes are applied gently to the skin, soothing it and preparing it for the preservation process. The assistant watches and assists, learning how to apply the correct amount, how to massage the oils into the skin, and how to maintain the dignity of the deceased. This is a role that requires sensitivity, patience, and respect, as well as a steady hand. Once the body is cleansed, the embalmer may begin the removal of organs. Here, the assistant plays a critical supporting role, handing tools, preparing containers, or assisting in delicate extractions. Organs such as the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines are carefully preserved, often in canopic jars, each protected by a guardian deity. The heart is typically left inside the body, believed to be essential for judgment in the afterlife. The assistant ensures that every step is done correctly, maintaining both cleanliness and ritual precision. Natron is applied next, a mixture of salt and minerals that dehydrates the body, preventing decay. The assistant sprinkles, rubs, and monitors the drying process. This requires constant observation, ensuring that the body is preserved evenly and that the sacred rituals are respected. Time moves slowly in this chamber, measured by the careful application of substances and the quiet diligence of hands at work. Linen wrapping follows, another stage where the assistant's skill is vital. Strips of cloth are soaked in oils, carefully layered, and wrapped around the body in intricate patterns. Amulets and charms may be placed within the folds, each symbol holding spiritual significance. The assistant moves with deliberate rhythm, wrapping slowly to maintain the shape and integrity of the body, ensuring that every layer aligns with sacred tradition. The work is physically and emotionally demanding. Hours are spent bending, kneeling, lifting, and supporting. The air is filled with the faint aroma of resins and oils, sometimes sweet, sometimes strong. The assistant must remain focused, even as the tasks repeat day after day. It is a job that demands patience, a calm mind, and respect for the sacredness of life and death. Despite its challenges, there is a quiet honor in this work. The embalmer's assistant contributes directly to the journey of the deceased into the afterlife. By preparing the body correctly, they help ensure that the soul may pass safely, guided and protected. Their role, though largely unseen, is essential to both family and divine expectations. Sometimes, assistants are also responsible for recording procedures, noting the materials used, or assisting in ceremonial rituals surrounding the burial. Their presence extends beyond practical work, supporting both ritual and tradition. They become part of a chain connecting the living, the deceased, and the divine, performing tasks that maintain cosmic order. At the end of a day, after the work is done, the assistant might step out into the warm Egyptian sun, the smell of the Nile flowing nearby. Perhaps they walk slowly, reflecting on the sacred work, the care they have given, the tiny details that matter so much. The chambers of the dead remain silent now, preserved and protected, and the assistant carries the quiet pride of their labor into the living world. The embalmer's assistant shows that even tasks that seem grim to modern eyes were approached with reverence and care. Their life was disciplined, measured, and deeply connected to the spiritual beliefs of their culture. Through careful hands, steady focus, and quiet dedication, they helped maintain a bridge between life and death, ensuring that tradition, ritual, and dignity endured. Imagine standing beside the assistant, feeling the calm rhythm of wrapping linen, observing the careful application of oils, sensing the fragrant yet solemn air. The world outside continues gently. The Nile reflects sunlight on mud brick walls, and life flows on. Within the chamber, every motion is sacred, every touch a service, every careful act a quiet dedication to eternity. Though their names are forgotten, the work of embalmers' assistants lives on in tombs, mummies, and the study of ancient Egyptian rituals. Their quiet labor reminds us that even the most unusual, challenging, or unseen roles can carry profound significance. In stillness, patience, and reverence, they contributed to the continuity of a civilization and the hope of a peaceful afterlife. Section 13. The Papyrus Scribe. In ancient Egypt, the written word was a bridge between life and eternity. Scribes were the keepers of knowledge, the recorders of events, and the creators of documents that guided religion, trade, and governance. Among them, the papyrus scribe held a quiet, essential role, Tasked with writing on delicate sheets of papyrus, the scribe spent long hours in still concentration, translating thoughts, numbers, and prayers into neat columns of hieroglyphs or cursive script. Imagine the scribe seated at a low table, sunlight filtering through the narrow window of a cool stone room. On the table lie bundles of papyrus, reed brushes, inkstones filled with black and red pigment, and a small water container for mixing ink. The air is calm and slightly fragrant with the faint scent of reeds and ink. Each tool is essential, and the scribe handles them with careful precision, aware that a single mistake could alter meaning or require starting over entirely. The work is meticulous. The scribe begins by preparing the ink, grinding pigments with water or gum to the right consistency. Too thick, and the strokes would smear. Too thin, and the characters might fade or blot. Once the ink is ready, the scribe dips a fine reed brush and begins to write. Hieroglyphs are arranged in perfect rows, each symbol meaningful, each stroke deliberate. The scribe's hand moves with rhythm, almost meditative, bringing the papyrus to life with carefully placed signs and symbols. Beyond the technical skill, the scribe requires patience and focus. Some documents are long lists of grain deliveries or census records. Others are sacred texts meant for temples or tombs. Regardless of the purpose, the scribe treats each sheet of papyrus with care, aware that his work preserves knowledge for generations. Errors are not just inconvenient, they could affect ritual correctness, tax records, or even the honor of a family. The scribe's day is quiet but structured. Hours pass in a steady rhythm, mixing ink, aligning papyrus sheets, drawing lines for guidance, and writing symbols slowly and deliberately. Sometimes assistants bring materials or help correct minor mistakes. Sometimes the scribe pauses to study reference texts, ensuring that each character is accurate, that each word conveys the intended meaning, and that the sequence maintains both clarity and beauty. The physical aspects of the job are gentle but demanding in their own way. Eyes strain from close focus, hands must remain steady for hours, and the scribe must balance concentration with comfort. Posture is essential. Too bent and the back aches, too relaxed and mistakes increase. Even the movement of the hand must be fluid, as jerky motions can smear the ink or break the rhythm of the work. The scribe also interacts with other artisans, priests, and officials, coordinating the information that must be recorded. In tombs, he may copy sacred texts or spells, ensuring the deceased can navigate the afterlife successfully. In administrative offices, he keeps accounts of grain, livestock, and trade. In each case, the scribe is part of a larger network, quietly supporting the function of both earthly life and spiritual continuity. Despite the repetitive nature of writing, there is a subtle beauty in the work. The arrangement of hieroglyphs, the balance of red and black ink, and the gentle curve of strokes create a visual rhythm that is calming, even soothing. Each sheet becomes a miniature work of art, conveying not only information, but also the care and attention of the scribe. Sometimes, the scribe's work extends beyond words. He may illustrate small images on the papyrus depicting offerings, gods, or daily activities. These illustrations are delicate and precise, requiring the same patience as writing. Each tiny drawing contributes to the story, making the text more vivid and meaningful for those who will see it, now and in the centuries to come. At the end of the day, the scribe may pause to admire his work. Rows of symbols, carefully written and aligned. stretch across sheets of papyrus. The air is quiet, punctuated only by distant sounds from the streets outside. The Nile may shimmer in the sunlight, reeds sway gently, and life continues beyond the room. Inside, there is a sense of calm accomplishment, the quiet pride of having preserved knowledge, ritual, and culture in each carefully written line. The papyrus scribe reminds us that even work that seems solitary or repetitive carries meaning. Each stroke of the brush is an act of preservation, a gentle service to both community and eternity. Through careful focus, patience, and dedication, the scribe ensures that words, ideas, and beliefs are recorded accurately, creating a bridge between the living, the sacred, and the future. Imagine sitting beside a papyrus scribe, watching the slow movement of reed on papyrus, feeling the gentle rhythm of writing, noticing the calm concentration, and smelling the faint scent of ink and reeds. The world is still, the air is calm, and the quiet dedication of the scribe creates a serene, timeless space where knowledge and culture endure. Section 14. The Tomb Architect. In ancient Egypt, tombs were more than resting places. They were carefully designed gateways to eternity. The tomb architect held a unique and essential role, blending artistry, engineering, and ritual knowledge. Tasked with planning the chambers, corridors, and decorated spaces, the architect worked slowly and meticulously, ensuring that every detail served both practical and spiritual purposes. His work connected the living to the divine and provided a permanent home for the deceased's journey into the afterlife. Imagine the architect standing beside a large sheet of papyrus or a smooth limestone tablet. He sketches lines with charcoal or red ink, measuring proportions, plotting walls, and marking spaces for chambers, niches, and passageways. Each line is deliberate. Each corner is considered. The architect balances structural stability with sacred symbolism, knowing that every measurement, every angle affects both safety and ritual meaning. Tombs often required intricate planning. Some contained multiple chambers, decorated ceilings, and shafts designed to protect the body and treasures. The architect needed a deep understanding of stone, mortar, and tools, as well as the spiritual requirements of the tomb. He collaborated with stonemasons, sculptors, and painters, coordinating the work so that each stage flowed smoothly into the next. Patience was essential. Rushing could compromise the structure or the sacred order. The architect's studio might be filled with models, sketches, and references. He measured carefully, sometimes pacing the stone floors of the intended site, visualizing how light and shadow would play across corridors, how air would move, and how the tomb would endure over centuries. The room is quiet, except for the scratching of tools, the soft shifting of papyrus, and the faint scent of stone dust. Each task is deliberate, each movement purposeful, each design a blend of artistry and practicality. Designing a tomb was both a technical and spiritual endeavor. Chambers were aligned according to ritual principles, passages carefully oriented, and surfaces marked for decoration. Symbols and inscriptions were planned in advance, ensuring that scribes and painters would know exactly where to place sacred texts and images. The architect's work required foresight, precision, and a deep understanding of both earthly and divine expectations. Sometimes, the architect would visit quarries or stone yards to select the right blocks for construction. He assessed weight, texture, and durability, considering how each stone would fit into the overall design. He supervised the transportation and placement of these stones, guiding teams of laborers in slow, careful work. Every stone carried both functional and symbolic weight, and the architect ensured they were positioned perfectly. The physical aspect of the job demanded both strength and patience. Measuring long corridors, climbing scaffolds, marking high ceilings, all required focus and endurance. Yet there was a quiet rhythm to the labor. Each day, the architect refined plans, adjusted measurements, and collaborated with artisans. The work was never hurried. Precision and care were paramount, and the sacred purpose of the tomb lent a calm seriousness to every action. Decorative planning was equally important. The architect determined where scenes of gods, offerings, and daily life would appear, considering proportions, spacing, and visual harmony. Hieroglyphs were mapped, murals designed, and spaces left for sculptures or reliefs. The architect's vision guided the work of painters, sculptors, and scribes, ensuring that every element aligned with both aesthetic and spiritual goals. Even the smallest decisions carried weight. A doorway's height, a corridor's width, or the placement of a niche could influence the tomb's overall effect. The architect balanced artistic vision with functional requirements, thinking about the comfort of future visitors, the stability of stone, and the ritual needs of the deceased. Each decision was made slowly, carefully, and with full attention to detail. The architect's influence extended beyond a single tomb. His designs reflected traditions passed down through generations, incorporating lessons learned from earlier structures and innovations for future constructions. Through his planning, the culture's values, beliefs, and aesthetic principles were expressed and preserved. His work was a quiet, enduring contribution to the civilization, linking generations of builders, artisans, and the deceased themselves. Imagine standing beside the tomb architect as he paces a planned corridor, marking lines on stone, observing shadows, envisioning the finished chambers. The air is calm, the sun soft, and every movement seems deliberate, almost ritualistic. Dust floats lazily in the light. Tools rest neatly on tables. And the quiet focus of the architect creates a sense of timelessness. Each measurement, each drawn line, each thoughtful decision carries care, skill, and reverence. Though largely unseen, the tomb architect's work endures in the magnificent structures that survive to this day. His careful planning allowed tombs to remain intact for centuries, guiding generations of artisans and preserving the rituals and beliefs of ancient Egypt. The quiet, methodical labor, the patient attention to detail, and the spiritual awareness embedded in each design remind us of the importance of dedication, skill, and calm focus. The tomb architect demonstrates that work, when approached with patience, thoughtfulness, and respect, can leave a lasting legacy. Every line drawn, every stone planned, and every chamber measured was a contribution to a culture's spiritual and artistic heritage. In his stillness, focus, and quiet creativity, he shaped eternity itself, leaving a mark that speaks across the ages. Section 15. The Funerary Musician. In ancient Egypt, music was a vital part of life and death. It guided ceremonies, comforted mourners, and honored the departed. Funerary musicians held a quiet but essential role in this process. Their instruments, voices, and rhythms created a gentle, sacred atmosphere that bridged the world of the living with the realm of the dead. The musician's work required focus, sensitivity, and a deep understanding of ritual and tradition. Imagine the musician standing near the tomb entrance, holding a harp, lute, or set of small percussion instruments. The air is calm, and the sunlight filters softly through the temple doorway. Around him, family members, priests, and assistants move with care, performing the steps of the burial ritual. The musician begins slowly, letting each note resonate gently through the chamber. There is no hurry. Each sound is intentional, carrying weight and meaning. Funerary music often included hymns, chants, and melodies that were repeated in calm, meditative patterns. The musician's role was to maintain steady rhythm, guide the tone of the ceremony, and create a sense of serenity. Each note was chosen to honor the deceased, to soothe the living, and to please the gods who watched over the rites. The repetition of sound, combined with soft harmonies, created a quiet, enveloping presence that seemed to linger in the air long after it was produced. The musician worked with precision. Instruments were tuned carefully, strings were placed when needed, and reeds or percussion materials prepared in advance. Even the simplest melody required attention. Hand placement, breath control, and timing were all essential. Mistakes were subtle but noticeable, and the musician corrected them calmly, ensuring that the flow of the ceremony remained uninterrupted. Music also served a symbolic purpose. Certain melodies were associated with specific deities, others with protection, and still others with safe passage to the afterlife. Funerary musicians had to remember which tunes suited which stage of the ritual, when to slow the tempo, when to emphasize certain tones, and when to allow silence to fill the space. Their knowledge combined technical skill with spiritual awareness, and their presence was both practical and sacred. The musician's environment was often serene. The sounds of the Nile, the whisper of winds over the desert, or the faint shuffle of feet in ceremonial spaces added to the calm atmosphere. Instruments were chosen not only for their sound, but also for the way they blended with ambient noise. The musician's voice, when used, was gentle, measured, and deliberate, rising and falling in quiet waves that harmonized with both instruments and ritual. Funerary musicians sometimes worked alone, practicing and preparing for days before a ceremony. At other times, they performed in groups, creating layers of sound that enriched the ritual experience. Percussion added soft rhythm, string instruments provided melodic patterns, and occasional wind instruments added airy tones. Together, these sounds created an immersive, meditative environment, calming participants and honoring the sacred purpose of the rites. The work demanded both patience and endurance. Hours of standing, playing, and singing required careful attention to posture and breath. Musicians had to maintain focus, even as rituals extended through the day, ensuring that each note was steady and pure. Their labor, while gentle and quiet, was essential to the rhythm and success of the ceremony. Funerary music also left a subtle imprint on memory and culture. The melodies, chants, and rhythms performed by musicians influenced future generations, preserved in the structure of songs, instruments, and ceremonial patterns. Even now, archaeologists and historians can trace elements of these ancient performances, imagining the calm, enveloping sounds that filled tombs and temples. Imagine standing quietly beside the funerary musician, feeling the vibrations of the harp strings, hearing the soft percussion, and sensing the care in each note. The world outside is gentle, the sun warm, and the air calm. Inside, Every sound carries intention. Every rhythm provides comfort, and every pause allows reflection. It is a moment of serenity, where music, ritual, and reverence converge into a quiet, timeless experience. The funerary musician reminds us that even unseen work can carry profound significance. Through sound, patience, and devotion, the musician honored the dead, supported the living, and preserved the traditions of a culture. Each melody, carefully crafted and performed, became part of a spiritual landscape, echoing through stone corridors, temple halls, and generations of memory. Even today, imagining the musician's soft, deliberate notes, the gentle rustle of robes, and the calm environment allows us to feel the quiet power of devotion and artistry. The funerary musician's work is a testament to the influence of careful, patient, and meaningful labor, a gentle reminder that even the smallest acts of dedication can create beauty, serenity, and continuity across centuries. Outro. And now, our journey comes to a gentle close. We have wandered quietly through the lives of ancient Egyptians, exploring their work, their rituals, and their dedication. Each story we encountered, from perfumers to scribes, architects to musicians, reminds us of the care, patience, and devotion of people long ago. Let your thoughts drift slowly, imagining soft incense, calm rivers, and quiet chambers. The sun casts warm light across the stone. Instruments hum softly, and every task is performed with care. There is no rush. There is only serenity. As you breathe in and out, allow yourself to feel calm, peaceful, and safe. The whispers of history fade gently, leaving you in a quiet, reflective space. Let your mind rest, carried by the calm rhythm of stories, images, and gentle work from long ago. Soon, your eyes may close, your body may relax, and sleep may arrive softly. Carry this sense of calm with you, and know that history, patience, and quiet devotion can inspire peace in every moment. Good night.